What is the most powerful trait we have? You need power, speed. Let your imagination do the rest.
Boxing King Media. We're back for another episode of the Brutally Honest podcast, and this time it's getting done virtually as we're both in different parts of the world. Dom, thank you for jumping on. I thought it's only right, boxing lost an absolute legend a few days ago, and it's only right that we speak about him and because you've got some personal interaction and experience with the legend that was Mike McCullum.
Yeah, I mean, fantastic fighter when you look at his record. And obviously, as paths crossed years ago when he boxed Harold Graham for the vacant WBA middleweight title at the Albert Hall. I was 22 years old at the time. I can remember it was Errol's first world title challenge. And we went down, I think 3 or 4 coaches went from Winkerbank all the way down to the Albert Hall. I can remember being sat up in the rafters and a balcony up at the top. Watching the fight. Was absolutely packed out. It was. And yeah, a great
I,
atmosphere.
I'm going to ask you some details about the whole fight and build up. One of the interesting things when you look at it, when they fought each other, and again, these kind of fights rarely happen these days unless somebody's putting down crazy amounts of money. But I think Harold was like 43-1, something like that, and Mike was 33 or 35-1. So they both had like one losses on the record, like really good winning records on good streaks, etc. And obviously they put it on the line against each other. Um, how easy was that fight to get made? Like, do you remember much about how that fight got made?
No, not really, but surprising that the one loss on both of their records at the time was a fella called Sambu Kalambe, and I think he boxed out of Italy, but he was a black guy, like an African or something like that. But he was situated in Italy, I think, and he was a bit of a bogeyman. He was a very good fighter. They both got beat by him. Mike McCallum boxed him again and beat him. Errol boxed him again and lost to him again, I think, anyway. But
He did, yeah.
and I always remember that fight because it was for the European title fight, and Errol Graham at that point decided to leave me dad. He'd recently done a deal with Barney Eastwood to manage him to get him the world title fight, and I think they wanted him to be more of an aggressive fighter. When he boxed Callenby and it all went wrong. My dad was down at the fight, and Errol kind of got beat up in that fight. They made him fight the wrong fight, and then he came back to Sheffield, kind of with his tail between his legs. Well, not really between his legs, probably didn't. But I was only young at the time. Anyway, he got back on winning ways, and they ended up getting him another fight, a world title fight, and he boxed Mike McCallum. And he got beat by a point, and it was an interesting fight because it was very close. But I just remember watching him thinking, Mike McCallum's a great fighter, but he struggled to lay a glove on Errol, really, anything significant. Errol being a southpaw, very elusive. And, I think round 8 was the turning point in that fight. Errol kind of ducked under him, spun him, and clipped him as he turned him, and he fell on the floor. And the referee jumped in and took a point off Errol. And the decision was a split decision to Mike McCallum. Now, if the referee, I thought it was a bit severe, but if you look at today's standards, that would never have happened by today's standards, getting a point took off for doing that. But he got his point took off him. It was a split decision. One judge went for Herald, one judge went for McCallum, and the other judge gave it to McCallum by the 1 point. Now, if that point had been taken off, it had just been a draw for the vacant title, and it might have been happened again. And that was a big changing point in Errol Graham's career because obviously he's been beat, so McCallum moves on. If it was a draw, things could have been different. They might have had a rematch. They might have done it again. But that was kind of a turning point in his career, Errol Graham. But they both went on, from that point on and
Tell
a
us
great
about
career.
Harold's Corner because I watched some of the footage a bit ago, and I was expecting to see you and your brother John in the corner, but it was your dad and
No,
two guys
we
I
were
don't
only
know.
young. Yeah, we were only young at the time, and and my dad was a trainer. Barney Eastwood was a multimillionaire bookmaker from Northern Ireland. He had his own chain of uh, betting officers. Eastwood's massive amount of money. And the Irish guy was a guy called Eddie somebody. I forget what his second name was, but it'll come to me. But he was also involved. But my dad was the one who trained him. Um, but yeah, so Barney Eastwood backed. Obviously, Barney Eastwood. You may remember him as the manager of Barry McGuigan. You might not know that, but that was a man who brought Barry McGuigan through. And it was funny because people won't remember this either. Barry McGuigan did a record called "Thank You Very Much, Mr. Eastwood," and that was an interesting record. It was for getting him, getting him to the world title and becoming a champion. The later fell out, and I think he tried to sue Barney Eastwood and he failed. And that kind of broke Barry McGuigan at the time. But Barney Eastwood was quite a character. He was also involved with Neil Sinclair, a fighter from, I think he was from Northern Ireland. He could punch a bit. He was involved with him, his career, and got him a fight with Daniel Santos. Many people probably won't remember that. He was quite a decent fighter. So Barney Eastwood had a bit for a period of time, in the 80s from McGuigan onwards. He had quite a big role in boxing. I think he's passed away now, but a nice guy. And I can always remember my dad telling me a story when they went over to meet Barney Eastwood, and they went to his house. It was a massive house, loads of security, because he was a multi-millionaire, and he got these guard dogs. I think they were like Alsatians. And at the time, we had this guy running who was involved in the gym. They called him Terry, a bit of a character around Winkerbank, and he kind of looked after the gym, took the kids out and about. And he come off the flower estate up the road, bit of a rough area, and he lived just at the bottom below the gym. So if anything needed doing around the gym, he'd come and be a bit of an handyman and sort stuff out. Well, they drove over to Northern Ireland, went on the ferry, and we had a VW camper van at the time. And Terry, drove them all over. Me dad, him, and a few others, and they went to Barney Eastwood's house. And he got these 4 dogs, these Alsatians, and he said to me, Dad, Brendan, he goes, these dogs, he says, they can understand 4 languages, commands in 4 languages. So this fella Terry pipes, because well, how much should they cost them dogs? He went, they cost 15 grand each. He went, £60,000 you spent on them dogs. He says, I'd want them to be able to speak English for that amount of money. And my dad just cracked up. This fella looked as if to say, who's this guy? Then later on in the day, they were in the house, and this fella sat down. He's got this, brandy in a glass, like, most expensive brandy, and he's smoking Cuban cigars. This fella who's come off this council estate. He went to me, Dad, this is a life, Brendan. And that just shows you, with characters in boxing, how far you can get up and where you can get to. But it was quite a character, Terry. He's still around now. He was around with Errol.
This is why I like enjoy talking to you, Dom, because these like backstories that a lot of people don't get to hear about, and I think people find them fascinating. I'm curious to know, when he was training for that particular fight, obviously fighting a guy coming over from Jamaica with a big reputation, and let's not forget at that point, Mike McCALLUM, even though he had lost once, he took Julian Jackson's and Julian Jackson at the time was 29-0 with 27 knockouts, a feared puncher. Even now, if you look at his record, he retired with I think 40 something knockouts in 50 something fights, and people talk about him as one of the most feared punchers of all time, but Mike McCALLUM stopped him. So for Harold to go in there, what was it like in the gym? I just want to know if you could share some stories about what it
I mean, obviously McCALLUM was a good fighter, and we knew of his reputation, but we really rated Errol at the time. And Errol trained hard. He also a consummate pro. And you got to remember, back in those days, I'm not sure it happened for this fight, but most of Errol's fights, he had to actually weigh in on the day at 12 o'clock. So you kind of, middleweights were kind of true middleweights. Whereas today, a true middleweight, if you had to weigh in on the day, most middleweights would probably be like heavyweights, because they haven't got the luxury of a 24-hour weigh-in. So fighters were more, Errol Graham was probably a slightly bigger build than Kell Brook as a welterweight. Very muscular, not particularly tall, but, what a fantastic boxer at the time. But everybody knew it was a big, tough fight. Errol was fit. I can remember we used to go running with him. He'd always run 10 miles a day, one session in the morning, one session at night. Training was totally different back then. It was more geared around boxing skills, fitness. None of this S&C. Errol Graham never did S&C conditioning, never did it. Didn't need to. Very strong. Everything was skill based with him, reflexes, but very physically strong and a tremendous runner. And I found out a harsh lesson.
Was this around the time he was staying with you guys as well, Errol?
No. By this time, when I was 22 at the time, Errol kind of lived with us from, I was about aged probably 12, 13. and I think Errol's 60. I think Errol's 60. Might be 66. I think. Yeah, I think he's 66, 66, 67. So a few years older than me. I think. No, by this time he got his own house and moved away. He lived with us for a few years, probably for 2 or 3 years, and then he got his own house. But yeah, we used to have to go training together, do all the running. So everybody had to keep on top of him. And yeah, very fit fella, very good runner. But he was prepared well for that fight. And I don't think Mike McCallum expected what he expected. It was a very close fight. And to be honest, everyone was very unlucky to win. I think, in my opinion, he did win. But that's just the twist of fate.
You mean Mike was unlucky to win?
Sorry?
I think you just
I
said
said Harold was. Oh, well, yeah, maybe. I mean, like I say, it was a bit harsh. The point, it was around it. You'll see that. I mean, it'd be interesting to put a clip up. You'll see that he did that move earlier in the fight. He got underneath him, put his arm behind him, spun him round. If McCallum fell into the corner but stayed on his feet, the referee never did anything. He did it again a few rounds later, and McCallum stumbled over and fell down, and the referee jumped in. It was nothing really. But it kind of, that shaped the fight, the way the fight went, and Errol got beat in his first world title fight, and it just makes you wonder, if that hadn't happened, it's all ifs and buts, how his career had gone. He's always been known as the best fighter, one of Britain's best fighters, never to win a world title.
How good was Mike McCullough? I mean, if you look at him through history, Spencer Fearon, I know has talked about Mike McCullum to me for years. But obviously the new age fans, will probably just know the name, but without dissecting records, like I said, Julian Jackson, that's a big statement. He took Julian Jackson's and he stopped him in fashion as well.
Michael Watson.
Yeah, and Julian Jackson at the time was complaining about the stoppage, but if you look at it, in this day and age, you could have been stopped 10 seconds earlier.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, he
Don't
was a good fighter, Mike McCallum. Very clever, very clever. The body snatcher, used to work to the body, slow the opponents down. Very, very good fighter. And Julian Jackson, sorry.
So I was just saying, he beat Donald Curry, obviously Herald, Steve Collins, as you said, Michael Watson. He fought James Toney in a trilogy. All three fights were on points, close points decisions. He drew one and lost two. And then he even fought Roy Jones Jr. towards the end of his career. So some serious names.
Yeah, he had some tremendous fights, and like I say, not the most impressive, but one of the most impressive was when he beat Julian Jackson, because Julian Jackson was such a devastating puncher, as we saw when he boxed Errol Graham. I mean, Errol Graham, that was another fight that Errol Graham had got completely in the bag and failed to follow instructions from the corner. My dad just told him to go out that round and move around, and the fight was going to get stopped. And I think Errol decided he was going to go in for the kill, and he got one of the most famous knockouts ever against him. But yeah, Mike McCallum, a tremendous fighter, and for a period of time, probably he might have been late 2000s, maybe 2010, 12. He actually came over to Sheffield for a stint of time. He came over with the Croc guy and the heavyweight Tim Witherspoon. He knocked around with them. I can remember him coming to a few shows in Sheffield at the time, and Mike McCallum, like at the time, he obviously a big name still, and a lot of people in Sheffield met him. He spent a bit of time in Sheffield training. He was training a few people actually, along with Tim Witherspoon, I believe, if I remember correctly. So yeah, quite a character and tremendous fighter, a tremendous ambassador for the sport of boxing, really, in what he did. But he's gone, and he's only 68 years old, and it just makes you wonder, with these fighters, whether it's from the boxing or the lifestyle, or he kind of died suddenly in his car. I think might have been a heart attack.
Apparently on the way to the gym.
Yeah, which is sad. But listen, boxing's a hard game, and the number of fights, when you think about it, over a period of time, he had a long career. Repeatedly getting hit around their head. I would imagine. Do you know what? At the end, I don't think he had much money as well. He was kind of broke, which is astounding, really, when you consider the amount of fights and the big money fights they had and the careers that they had. But I guess they just think it's going to last forever, and it's not going to last forever. So, it's a warning to the fighters out there. Make hay while the sun shines, and get out when you've got all your faculties.
Indeed, and I hope Jamaica, where he's from. I know he lived in New York, but I hope they do something for him regards to you know, what
Well, I
he's a
saw
nationalist.
where somebody whether it's either a woman or someone who's in charge in Jamaica. She's done something. I just saw a glimpse of it flashed up. So I think he's getting honoured somewhere in Jamaica by somebody. But yeah, it's like I say, another legend gone.
Indeed. Before I let you go, I just want to ask you one other question. I interviewed Joe Gallagher the other day, and one of the questions I asked him, I don't know if you watched the Highfield podcast by Terry Chapadama. I hope I said his name right. And he was raising some points about how some trainers don't get it in the neck as much as others, and he was basically referring to Mark Tibbs. And obviously, like I said, this is Terry's opinion. He was basically saying that Mark's been let off and not enough's been said about it. And then so I just want to get your opinion. That does that actually happen? Do some trainers get
Regarding
more?
what Mark getting left off for
Basically,
what?
Johnny Fisher losing basically, and you know people talking about the matchmaking and development of fighters, etc. So I think the question basically is, do some fighters? That's the example he was giving. He was giving Mark Tibbs as an example, but the question I've got for
Probably,
you,
probably, a,
Dom,
probably a bad example, but go on.
from your experience in boxing, have you over the years seen some trainers get it more in the neck? Does that happen? Does that happen because of certain media people out there? Do they have agendas, all that kind of stuff? Have you experienced that?
Well, I've had a lot of flack over the years. It's water for ducks back to me, and I can remember one of the famous incidents when I came under the spotlight is when Kell Brook boxed Carson Jones, and I've got people shouting up from the corner, and this probably goes back to it might have been Adam Smith actually, or it might have been another commentator. It might not have been Adam. It might not have been Adam, but somebody was. I think it was at the time. It might have been. It could have been Eddie. It could have been Kell's dad. It might have even been Brian Rose shouting up instructions. I just turned around and give him a mouthful and told him to keep their mouth shut. Um, you know, and I think the commentator said, "Oh, Dominic Ingle's losing it in the corner and everything else," and blah blah blah. And I just laughed. I just laughed because at the end of the day, yeah, they're entitled to their opinions, but I got it under control. And I got Kell Brook through that fight. It got to round 7, and the fight started turning towards Carson Jones's favour. And just a few wise words from me and Kell pulling it out of the bag managed to turn the fight around and win the fight. But I came under a lot of criticism, but it don't really matter to me because look, fighters make the choice. They're either going to clear off or they're going to stick with you. That's it. No matter what you say or what you do, they're just going to make that choice. So as for Mark Tibbs, it depends how much control he's got over the opponent choice, and this is why you have a manager. I think Mark Tibbs trains Johnny Fisher. I don't know if he manages him. I might be wrong. So you're the trainer.
He's managed by I think for this last fight it was a collab between Sam Jones and S-Jam.
Oh well, there you go. Then we've had conversations about Sam Jones before, haven't we? Where he's not particularly like what I said about matchmaking and everything else. But this is the thing, there's a lot of clashes between trainers and managers over opponents for fights, and a lot of this is down to the manager thinking probably they know better than the trainer. And if trainers are consistently with fighters day in day out, and they know what kind of mindset they're in, how they're looking in the gym, and sometimes you get an overambitious manager wanting to make fights with your fighter that really they shouldn't be, and so you can't put the blame fairly and squarely on Mark Tibbs's shoulders because he's got the choice. The fighter comes to him or the manager comes to him and said, "You're fighting this kid." And most fighters are going to take that fight regardless because they want the money, the fighters they're going to fight. The trainer might have reservations and he can voice those reservations. But if the manager's made their mind up and the fighter's made their mind up, they're going to take that fight against the trainer's advice. The trainer's got the option of A, training the fighter and getting his money because he needs his money and it's not a lot, he's only getting 10%. And it's his career and it's his livelihood and he's got kids, Mark Tibbs. Or saying, I'm not going to train you for that fight because I think it's the wrong fight for you. And then he'll probably get the sack and they'll get another trainer and that's him done. So he's lost his money. And not many trainers are in a position to do that. I was in that position when Kell Brook fought Terence Crawford. His dad came to me and said, is fighting Terence Crawford. And I said, he's not ready. He's not fit enough. He's not going to win that fight. He's going to get knocked out. And he said to me, I disagree with you. I said, you can disagree all you want. You don't know more than me about boxing. And I'm telling you now, he's going to get knocked out. I'm not going to train him for that fight. I got offered a lot of money. I said, I'm not even doing it for the money. I was in a position to turn the fight down for the money. And I wasn't in a position that everybody could always do with money. But I'm not ever going to train a fighter who I know is going to get beat because they haven't trained properly. If they're going to get beat, they're going to get beat, in the best shape they can be, that they've trained hard for that fight, that they believe they can win the fight. Not just going to get in with a fighter for money. That's when it all starts going wrong. And Kell Brook got beat he got beat in 4 rounds. And that's the choice you have to make. Some trainers aren't in the position to make that choice because, they're just not. So, it's all right pointing the finger at Mark Tibbs. Mark Tibbs has got an athlete or a fighter to work with, and it's going to be the fighter's limitations what are going to get him beat in the fight. The trainer can do the best he can do. The manager can make the fights, but the fighter's got to be able to get in, and everybody's got to recognise the ability of the fighter. Me personally, after watching that close fight with Johnny Fisher the first time, you would have avoided that fight. Do you understand? You would have avoided that rematch. You'd have just took him a slightly different route.
But you did pick Johnny to win, though. The rematch.
Yeah, I did. But I picked him. I picked him in the first fight to win. But like I said in the last interview, that I think my choice was based on Dave Allen always saying that he watches our interviews, and when Dominic Ingle picks against him, it motivates him more. So there was a bit of a reason behind that. I always want to see Dave Allen win because he's from Yorkshire. He's a nice kid. I've trained him. And that's not like, getting out of that situation, that prediction.
Yeah.
It's like, it don't really matter to me whether Johnny Fisher wins or Dave Allen wins. Johnny Fisher's a novice fighter coming through. Dave Allen's been a good pro at the end of his career. It's the same old thing again. Johnny Fisher, Dave Allen, they've come this way, they've balanced out here, got to the crossroads. Johnny Fisher should have moved up and beat Dave Allen, and Dave Allen should have been continually falling. But what's happened is he got to this crossroad fight, and Johnny Fisher's supposed to be on the rise, and Dave Allen's beat him. And temporarily, Dave's up there now, and he's put himself in the firing line for the bigger, harder fights. And it'll be interesting to see how those fights are managed. But, people doing interviews and videos on blaming trainers. What these people don't realise is, it's a bit like you do a lot of interviews. If you came into the gym for a week for 8 hours a day and watched what goes on behind the scenes, you'd have a better understanding, or even these interviewers have a better understanding what actually happens in gyms and how the fighters are and the trainers. A better understanding, instead of just taking a screenshot of a fight and thinking they can work everything out from that fight. They can't, because they don't know what's going on in the fighter's life. Look at Dave Allen over the years when he turned and said, I never trained properly for fights. I always spent my money. I didn't pay attention to it. I should have done this. But at the time when he was coming through, people thought he was living the life, training properly. And he wasn't. He was kind of doing it on a wing and a prayer. Thankfully, he's doing it a bit better this time. So you've got to have more of an insight.
That particular podcast, Tom, just for context, he was kind of basing it on not just John. He was talking about Dillian White leaving as well. I think John Hedges recently left. Just kind of giving some examples. Like I said, I'm not saying he's right or wrong, but just for context, that's what I'm saying.
But there's no loyalty. There's no loyalty with fighters. There's very little loyalty with fighters. Very little loyalty with fighters. And if something goes wrong, when the fighters are winning, most of the time it's down to them. When they're losing, it's down to the trainer. That's a fight. There's only a few fighters who are great. Look at Cole Froch. Cole Froch had a tremendous career with Robert McCracken. Robert McCracken's smart trainer, could weigh up the opponents, knew all the fighters from the amateurs. He got beat by Andre Ward. I was at that fight because Kell Brook boxed on the undercard. And Cole Froch didn't turn around and put any blame on Robert McCracken. He just got on with the next fight and then went on to win and did what he did. And he stuck with Robert McCracken all the way through thick and thin. Anthony Joshua, who trained with Robert McCracken, was doing really well under Robert McCracken all the way through. And I think the first Ruiz fight, I might be wrong here. I would have imagined how that fight went, because Robert, never kind of threw caution to the wind. He wasn't down to box Ruiz at the time. And they changed it, and they got Andy Ruiz. He was supposed to be boxing my favourite, Baby Jake Miller.
Baby Jake.
Yeah, baby Jake. Anyway, so, and it was all wrong, that fight. Everything, all the build up, everything, it was wrong. It got switched. There was chopping and changing, and that's the worst thing you can do before, before a fight, so close to a fight. And Anthony Joshua got beat. And I would imagine when all that started going on, and the fight got changed and the goalpost got changed, I can imagine Robert McCracken saying, "This is, we need to knock this on the head." But at that point, you can't knock it on the head because you've got the TV, you've got the promoters. They're going to be, Eddie's probably got to put a fight on anyway, so he's going to get sued. So you're kind of forced to take the fight. You understand? That's what happens. Then when it all goes tits up, they look around for somebody to blame when really they should have turned around and said, "I weren't ready." And remember before that fight, there were a lot of talk about him getting knocked out in sparring, being concussed. All these red flags were coming up. And everybody just looked the other way because there's too much money involved not to look the other way. And probably the person who actually said to Joshua, "Well, Robert McCracken saying you don't need to take this fight." And they don't listen to the trainer. So he probably went ahead, and Robert McCracken's put his time and he's trained him. And if, the fight says, "Well, that's what we're doing," is Robert McCracken going to say after all that time, well, I'm not going to go in the corner with you, because he probably won't get paid after putting all the time in. Do you understand? So he's got to take the fight. And then afterwards, I think that's the fight when I think they trained for the rematch, and Joshua beat him. And then they started getting somebody else involved. The other fellow who Joshua got involved with, helping on board with Fernandez, is it, or something like that?
Yeah, that's it, yeah. Angel Fernandez.
Yeah, got him involved, and then I think after that is when it kind of cleared off from Robert. But Robert training for the rematch had a different game plan, box and move. It was a big psychological hurdle to overcome for Joshua, because being beat like he did probably would have had an effect, and a combination of Andy Ruiz living the life in between the fights and completely throwing it all away. Probably thought he was just going to go and do the same thing, and he didn't. He got beat. So Joshua was back in the mix. But sometimes those decisions, those crucial decisions, aren't made by the trainer most of the time. They're made by everybody else.
Yeah, fair point. It's always good to get a different perspective, because, like I said, that's what he was saying, and I wanted to see, because you've come from a tutelage of where your dad's been a trainer and then you've been a trainer, so obviously Mark's in the same position. So it's good to get that viewpoint. But that's it, I think, for today, and hopefully I'll catch you soon. Hopefully when both in the same space.
No problem.
All right. We're looking for a new place. We moved on from the BYD. We're looking for a new location to film the podcast, so you never know. Watch out.
Well, I'm looking for some big car sponsor, maybe Rolls Royce or Daimler, something like that to suit me image, and that's what we're looking for. So you better get your finger out and get a good sponsoring. We need to be driving around in bigger cars, mate.
Yep, let's see what happens. Cheers, Dom.
What is the most powerful trait we have? You need power, speed. Let your imagination do the rest.